Today we're going to be looking at Learning Target 3 from Unit 7, which is I can create a two-way table and calculate relative frequency to describe data association. If you recall, we actually have already learned about this in a mini lesson a couple weeks ago, so hopefully this is more of a review learning target as opposed to something that's brand new. Just to review, a two-way table shows data from one sample group as it relates to two different categories. And then the relative frequencies are how often something happens divided by all the outcomes. And this helps determine possible associations between two variables. So for example 1a, we are going to be looking at a group of students. So Felipe surveyed students at his school. He found that 78 students own a cell phone and 57 of those students own an MP3 player. There are 12 students that do not own a cell phone but own an MP3 player. 9 students do not own either device. Construct a two-way table summarizing the data. So the first thing that I want to look at is what's the first piece of information that it gives me. The first thing that it tells me is that 78% of students own a cell phone. So if I look at my table here, my row that includes cell phones is the first row, and that 78 does not distinguish between who owns an MP3 player and who doesn't own an MP3 player. It just tells me that 78 students own a cell phone. So that 78 goes in the total for that row. It then goes on to say that 57 of those students own an MP3 player. So that's where we would go into the first cell of that row, and the students that own a cell phone, 57 of them own a MP3 player, or an MP3 player. We then see that there are 12 students that do not own a cell phone. So if I'm looking at my row of students who do not own a cell phone, it doesn't specify whether or not they own an MP3 player. It just tells me that 12 do not own a cell phone, but, I need to finish the statement, but own an MP3 player. That's pretty important. So that means that of the people who do not own a cell phone, 12 own an MP3 player. So that is going to be that first cell in that second row there. Be sure that you read the full sentence. Don't do what I do and stop after the comma. Make sure you're reading the whole thing all the way through. Our last sentence here says that 9 students do not own either device. So if I look at my table here, it means they don't own a cell phone and they don't own an MP3 player. Those two criteria meet in the second cell in the second row here, so I'll put 9 there. So now I need to use some basic math skills to discover the values that are not within my chart. So to figure out the number of students who have a cell phone but do not have an MP3 player, I need to subtract 57 from 78. That gives me 21, so we know that 21 students own a cell phone but not an MP3 player. If I look at my no cell phone row, 12 plus 9 is 21. And then if I add my columns, 57 plus 12 is 69, 21 plus 9 is 30, and then regardless if I add my total going down or my total going across, I should get 99 as my ultimate total of students surveyed. So for example 1b, we now want to use those values to find and interpret the relative frequencies of students by total number of students, and then round to the nearest hundredth. So remembering what we learned in our last learning target, if I have a denominator of 99, so for students who own a cell phone and an MP3 player, that's 57 out of 99. And remember, when you have 9s in the denominator, that means that you're going to have a repeating decimal. Now, where you need to remember what this means is when we're coming to our rounding. So 0.57 repeating is 0.5757. So if I'm rounding to the nearest hundredth, I need to look at that third digit, and that's going to round my hundredths place up, so I get 0.58 as my decimal here. For my number of students with a cell phone but no MP3 player, that's 21 out of 99, so that would be 0.21 repeating, which would be 0.212. A 2 we would not round up, so it would just stay as 0.21. And the total, we have 78 divided by 99, so 0.78 repeating would be 0.787, so that would mean I would round up to 0.79. Okay, I want you to try the last 6 boxes on your own. I'm going to pause the video, and then when we come back, you can check your work and see how you did. Okay, so hopefully you were able to get your relative frequencies relatively quickly and simply. Make sure I put the work to the right-hand column. Make sure if you did not get that, you double check your answers. Be careful with your rounding, okay? You want to make sure that you're rounding appropriately to make sure that your values kind of add up. So we now want to use our numbers or our relative frequencies to help us create an interpretation. So looking at this data, what kind of relationship do we see? And so there isn't really one place that you can start or one right thing that you can say. It's just looking at your different values that you have. So I could look at my first column here, my first cell, and I see that 58% of students own an MP3 player and a cell phone, or 21% of students do not own an MP3 player but own a cell phone. 79% of students own a cell phone, where 21% of students do not own a cell phone. I can make comparative statements of more students own a cell phone than own an MP3 player. So that would be comparing the 79 right here to the 70 here. I could also say that more than half of the students own both devices. I could say less than 10% of students own neither device, do not own either device. So there's lots of different things that you can say. I want you to go ahead and write down one of the things that you would interpret from that table with the relative frequencies before we move on. Okay, so I just wrote down a few of the things that I had mentioned while we were talking. Again, it's not wrong if you have something that is not listed there. So make sure, if you are unsure, shoot me an email. Say, I put this down. Does this make sense? Or in your private comments when you submit it, add that there. Does this make sense? Can you double check? I'm not sure. And I'll be looking through too if I see something that's way too outlandish and absolutely does not make sense. I'll comment to you to make sure that you're getting that feedback. So moving on, let's look at example 2. And example 2 has our information set up a little differently. It has a Venn diagram, which you will have learned in years past. And the Venn diagram compares the roller coasters at an amusement park as to whether or not they are made of steel or whether or not they have loops. Complete the two-way table below. And so if I am looking for the number of roller coasters that have steel and have loops, I'm going to look at my Venn diagram, and that's going to be that shared number. That's going to be where your circles overlap. So I would put 8 in that category. If I'm interested in the roller coasters that have loops but are not made of steel, that's going to be in the portion of the loops circle that does not overlap, which is 6. And then if I am looking for the number of roller coasters that have no loops but are made of steel, again, that would be in that first circle, and that would be 3. And then this sometimes people overlook. If I am looking for how many roller coasters are not steel and do not have loops, So I would think if you're at Great America, that would be including the Viper, right? It's made of wood and it is not made of steel, and it doesn't have loops, I think. It's been a very long time since I've been there. Regardless, it's going to be that value that is outside of those circles. So that is 3. So then if I'm looking for my totals, the total number of roller coasters with loops, 8 plus 6, we get 14. No loops, 3 plus 3, we get 6. The number of steel coasters, 8 plus 3, we get 11. And then the not steel coasters, that's 9. And then we can either add going down or add going to the right, and that is 20 coasters in all at this amusement park. Okay, so let's look down at the relative frequency. So if I want to discover the relative frequency for steel coasters with loops, that is going to be 8 out of 20. Now, if you are unclear as to how to do this without a calculator, 20 is a factor of 100. And remember, if we're rounding to the hundredths place, why not rewrite our fraction with a decimal of 100? So how do I get 20 to be 100? I'm going to multiply by 5. So if I multiply my numerator by 5, 8 times 5 is 40, so this would be 40 hundredths, which is 0.40, or if you rounded it to the tenths, it would be 0.4. Okay, if I'm looking at my not steel but has loops, that would be 6 out of 20. So if I multiply both of those by 5, that would be 30 out of 100, which would be 0.30 hundredths. And then 14 out of 20. Okay, 14 times 5 would be 70. Okay, and so 70 hundredths would be 0.70. Okay, go ahead and fill in the last of that box on your own, and then we'll come back together and you can check your work. So pause your video right now. Okay, so hopefully you were able to get the same values that I did. For no loops, it's 15 hundredths for both steel and not steel, which gives us a total of 30 hundredths. And then for the total amount of steel coasters, it was 55 hundredths, not steel, 45 hundredths, and then obviously the total is 1. So if I need to now interpret, again, I can look at these values and just see what sticks out to me. So if I were, looking at this data in a magazine or even just collecting the data myself at an amusement park, I would see, oh wow, there are a lot of coasters with loops. 70% of these coasters have loops. So that must be, the popular kind of coaster to have. I also kind of noticed that the number of steel coasters compared to the number of not steel coasters is pretty equal. They're almost half and half. Now again, it's not exactly half and half, but we can say that almost half coasters are steel and almost half the coasters are not steel. We could also say that of the roller coasters with no loops, there's an equal amount of steel and not steel coasters. We could say 40% of the roller coasters in this park have loops and are made of steel. So again, there's a lot of different statements that we could say looking at this data and comparing it. So go ahead right now, take a minute, write one down that you notice, and then we will come back together and see our answers or share our answers. Okay, so again, looking at what you wrote down and comparing it to what I wrote down, it might be something different, it might be something similar. Regardless, it's just really making sure that you're able to look at those relative frequencies and come up with a statement kind of comparing the two variables that we're discussing. So in this sense, it was the type of material that the coaster was made out of, as well as how many loops it included. Okay, so you are going to go into Otis to complete your practice. Make sure that you submit these notes on Google Classroom once you are completed with them, and then you can go on to your practice in Otis. You do not get credit for just half of them, so you need to make sure you do both of those steps. If you have any questions, I would happily like to meet with you during my office hours from 12:30 to 1:30. I do know that does conflict with some people's literacy classes, so if you really do need to get in touch with me, I'm happy to meet with you at a different time. You would just need to contact me separately to set up what time works best for you, and I will do my best to make it work with my schedule at home. So good luck. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you later. Bye.